All right, it is October 3rd, 2023. New York Times, David Leonhardt, our propagandist. We're covering the big story of the new Supreme Court term, as well as Kevin McCarthy, Sam Bankman-Fried, and the return of late night. Oh, that's a shame. All right, a libertarian court. With the Supreme Court's new term having started this week, I want to use today's newsletter to give you context on the issue that Adam Liptak, who covers the court for the Times, calls, quote, the story of the term, business regulation. Even before the court moved to the right over the past several years, business regulation was an area in which the ruling tended to be conservative. 13 years ago, Adam wrote an article explaining that the court led by Chief Justice John Roberts was the most business-friendly Supreme Court in modern history. Roberts and his colleagues tend to be skeptical of government regulation that tries to protect the environment, consumer safety, or workers' rights. Nice misnomers there. The government has done a horrible job at protecting the environment. Consumer safety, also a terrible job, and workers' rights, not really an issue. Workers' rights is just Marxist speak. That's all this really is. In all these areas, the court has often taken a laissez-faire approach, which is supposed to all corporations to behave as their executives, allowing corporations to behave as their executives think best. Now, that's not laissez-faire. Our government isn't meant to allow corporations to just rule roughshod over us. Corporations are not people. They don't have their own rights, and it's not supposed to work that way. Corporate charters are only supposed to be granted when whatever the business is doing something that's in the public interest. Beyond that, you're not supposed to have corporate charters that last for decades. That's corporate corruption, and that's not what our system is meant to be. So yeah, there's tons of corporate corruption, but that's, separate from the laissez-faire capitalist approach. This outlook hasn't been restricted to Republican-appointed judges. Either Democratic appointees who lean left on social issues like abortion, gay rights, and guns have been more conservative on business regulation. This shift has been part of the so-called neoliberal revolution in economic policy that took off in the 1980s. Free markets, according to this view, are more efficient than government can be. That's factually accurate. The government is terrible at everything that it does. If you would like examples of that, just take a look at all the different wars that they've declared, and they've lost all of them. Not as bad as the Australians losing a war against emus, but still we're pretty bad. How's the war on poverty going? War on drugs? Yeah, right. The modern judge is quite economically libertarian, Republican and Democrat alike, Adam told me. Still, there have been limits to the court's libertarianism. The EPA, FDA, IRS, and many other Washington agencies still exist. Yeah, there's 400 plus of them, after all. If you talk with many corporate executives or their lobbyists and lawyers, you will hear that they feel overregulated, and they have continued to bring lawsuits trying to lighten the burden of the government. Now, let's see. The federal code is over 100,000 pages. I would say that's plenty of regulations, probably too much. The story of this term, to use Adams' phrase, is whether corporations will persuade the Supreme Court to go further than it previously has and strike down whole new categories of regulation. 3 separate cases raise that prospect. First up, the justices will hear arguments in the first of those 3 cases this morning involving the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, known as the CFPB. The case details are technocratic, but the impact could be huge. When Congress and President Barack Obama created the agency in 2010 after the financial crisis, they funded it using transfers from the Federal Reserve. The goal was to shield the Bureau from back and forth partisan politics. The Fed is a semi-independent agency. It's not semi-independent. It is 100% entirely independent for similar reasons. It's also a private for-profit bank that is 100% illegal under our Constitution. Elizabeth Warren, then a law professor, a joke of a law professor who doesn't know anything about the law, really, who helped create the Bureau, was worried that Republicans would try to starve its budget. It's been functionally useless. It has no successes. It's just a waste of money. A banking industry group has urged that this funding structure is illegal, saying the federal agency should be accountable to Congress. That's truthful. The Bureau's defenders responded that it already is. Congress established the agency by passing a law that funded it in a specific way. To change this arrangement, the defenders say Congress should have to pass a new bills that a president signs. Last year, a federal appeals court based in New Orleans, the Fifth Circuit, perhaps the country's most conservative, having been shaped by President Donald Trump's appointees, agreed with the plaintiffs. Legal observers aren't sure what to expect from the Supreme Court. On the other hand, conservative justices dominate the court. On one hand, the conservative justices dominate the court. On the other, at least some of them have seemed uncomfortable with how far the Fifth Circuit has gone in other cases. The biggest case, an even more significant business case this term, involves a 1984 Supreme Court decision that has come to be known in the shorthand as the Chevron deference. Under Chevron deference, the court gave regulatory agencies leeway to interpret laws that Congress had left vague. Corporate lobbyists have long chafed at the ruling, believing that regulators should only have powers that Congress has explicitly given them. Undoing Chevron has been a central goal of the conservative legal movement. Conservatives talk about the importance of weakening the administrative state. Both sides, the administrative state, by the way, is a colloquial term to describe the 400 plus alphabet soup federal government agencies that doesn't include the state agencies. So again, how many federal agencies do we need? It's certainly less than 400. Both sides in the Chevron case agree that the stakes are large. When Congress passes a law, it cannot anticipate all the ways the economy will change in the coming years. If regulators have only the powers that Congress explicitly gives them, many regulations on the environment, consumer safety, worker safety would be vulnerable to legal challenge. Okay, that's fine. That's totally fine. Overruling Chevron, the Biden administration argued in a recent brief, would be a convulsive shock to the legal system. The third major business case this term involves the Securities and Exchange Commission. Depending on how the court rules, the SEC could have less power to pursue fraud cases. The justices have not set a date for oral arguments in the Chevron and SEC cases. And again, these come back down to how much regulation do we really need to have in a country? 100 plus thousand pages in the federal code. Each one of these agencies is empowered to just, if we allow Chevron to continue, basically they get to do kind of whatever they want. And, one of the big arguments is, hey, let's let legislators decide. That way, at least the public has some say in this, because we shouldn't be ruled by bureaucrats. They're unelected. They're unaccountable. Stacey Cowley, who covers the CFPB for the Times, profiled its director, Rohit Chopra, 41, who is fighting thyroid cancer. This term also includes cases on abortion, gerrymandering, guns, opioids, and social media. We'll preview them in future newsletters. The court heard arguments about the federal law that lets judges ignore minimum mandatory sentences for some drug offenses. Kevin McCarthy. Representative Matt Gaetz called for a vote on removing Kevin McCarthy as House Speaker after McCarthy worked with Democrats to prevent a government shutdown. The vote is expected within days. McCarthy has little chance of surviving without help from Democrats. They are considering what they could ask in return. Yeah, that right there. What they could ask in return. Because McCarthy works for the Uniparty. And, good on Gaetz for doing this, because this is going to prove that he works not for the people, not for the party he claims to represent, but in fact for a small group of moneyed elite interests that own the Democrat and Republican parties. There's maybe 20 or 30 total members of the House and Senate together that aren't compromised, that aren't owned by this small group of elite people, that the Times will cry about some of them, like the Koch brothers. They don't like them, but they're totally okay with the George Soroses of the world, the Bill Gates and the Warren Buffetts. They're fine with what those guys do. They just don't like what the quote-unquote conservative version of the same coin does. It's two sides of the same coin. Donald Trump. At the start of his New York civil fraud case, Trump called for the judge to be disbarred. Read takeaways from the first day. When Trump first suggested using the military against Mexican cartels, defense officials considered the idea ludicrous. Republicans now widely support it. It's actually perfectly legal to do so. We could just stop funding them. Going back to the civil fraud case, it's not going well, or the Times would be doing a lot more talking about it. The judge dismissed 80% of the case because the prosecutor failed to do her due diligence and did not. The statute of limitations had expired on a lot of them, just showing Letitia James is completely partisan. She campaigned on getting Trump. I mean, this is probably the most specious of all of his cases. And this one too, they're claiming that the Trump's lawyers forgot to check a box that says you want a jury trial. Jury trial is the default. You don't have to check a box. That's absurd beyond belief that you have to check a box, fill out paperwork to get a jury trial. That's the default, not a bench trial. Bench trial is something you specifically request. You don't have to request a jury trial. That's absurd. But be that as it may, that's how we're doing this. Of course, the judge made a fool of himself, laughing and smiling as Trump walked in. James glared at him, proving this is just a political persecution. There's no victim in this case. This is supposedly fraud with no victim. Trump paid back all the loans. Who is the person that suffered? There isn't any. And this is just made up lawfare to try and hurt Trump and to try and take his businesses away from him in an unlawful way. It's absolutely absurd what we're doing. Congress. Senator Robert Menendez corruption trial is scheduled for May, a month before the New Jersey state primary. He has not said whether he intends to run. He probably will. He's done it before. 3 people carjacked Representative Henry Cuellar at gunpoint near his home in Washington, D.C. He was not harmed. I'm glad to hear that. Representative Dean Phillips will step down from the House Democratic leadership. He's considering a primary challenge against Biden. Well, Biden is definitely not going to be the nominee, but who it's going to be, it's hard to say. Newsom looks like he's positioning himself, and it looks like DeSantis is helping him out with the debate. More on politics. A North Dakota state senator, his wife, and 2 of their children died after the plane he was piloting crashed at an airport in Utah. Oh man, that's awful. Crashed at the airport, man. Rest in peace, man. Hunter Biden is expected to plead not guilty when he's arraigned on gun charges at a Delaware court today, which is amazing because we know he's guilty. He's admitted this previously, but he's just, stringing this along. But they already let the statute of limitations lapse on the more serious tax charges and stuff. So that's all this was. This is just a head fake. Just a good distraction. The UN approved Kenya's plan to send security personnel to Haiti, where gang violence is rampant. Yeah, well, a lot of the kids are gone thanks to the Clintons. After a fire at an Iraqi wedding, Hall killed at least 119 people. Investigators called for local officials to be fired after failing to enforce safety standards. I would say more than fired. And probably someone needs to go to jail for that. Officials say Russia intends to spread election disinformation to undermine Western support for Ukraine. Of course, you're saying, I doubt the Russians even care at this point. Palestinian herders are abandoning their homes as a result of intimidation by Israeli settlers. 7 months after deadly earthquakes hit southern Turkey, some families are still living in tents. Technology. At Google's antitrust trial, the CEO of Microsoft testified that Google's stranglehold over search was so tight that his company could not compete. I don't care about Microsoft's inability to compete, honestly. Those are 2 of the largest corporations in the world. Sam Bankman-Fried, founder of the failed crypto exchange FTF, goes on trial today. A new book by Michael Lewis offers details on the firm's collapse. I wonder if it's going to detail how he used hundreds of millions of dollars that he stole from people to help Joe Biden get elected. And we don't talk about that at all. So Joe Biden was absolutely elected, but because people from Time Magazine helped, in their own words, create a shadow cabal to help Joe Biden get elected. And then Sam Bankman-Fried and others gave money that they stole from other people to help Biden win. So, but, freest and fairest election ever, right? Hollywood strikes. The striking actors union in Hollywood studios had their first talks in months. Negotiations will continue tomorrow. We've been gone so long. The Bachelor is now a grandfather. Late night shows return for their first broadcast since the writer's strike ended. Who cares? This just shows the late night hosts aren't funny. They're just actors who just go up there, read scripts that somebody else created. They tend to suck anyway. Nobody cared that they were gone. Everybody's unhappy that they're back. Life is better without this garbage. Other big story is Charlotte Sena, the 9-year-old girl who disappeared at a state park, is safe. Oh, that's awesome. Police found a fingerprint on a ransom note and raided a suspect's house where Charlotte was hidden in a cupboard. Awesome. Well, not that she was in a cupboard, but glad that they found her. Young children face a greater risk of eviction than any... Young children face a greater risk of eviction than any other age group. The risk is most acute for black children. They're not... Their parents are, not the children. Parents are getting evicted. Their kids... The Nobel Prize in Physics was awarded to 3 scientists, Pierre Agostini, Florence Carouse, and Anna Lehoulier, for their work on electrons. Americans without a 4-year college degree are struggling. Removing BA requirements for a job would help. In case in Angus Deaton Wright. Let's see. Hey, look at that, 104-year-old skydive. That's cool. Let's see. Oh, God. Some garbage there. All right. So today in history. Highlight October 3rd, 1995. I remember this day. I was in school. I was in ISS, as a matter of fact, for a minor little fight that I got into. I did not start the fight. A dude said that I was disparaging his mother. He then sucker punched me, and I Nolan Ryan'd him. Okay, so On October 3rd, 1995, the jury in the O.J. Simpson murder trial in Los Angeles found the former football star not guilty of the 1984 slayings of his former wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and Ronald Goldman. And nobody's ever attempted to even open that case back up because we know it was him and he got away with it. To quote, who was Dennis Miller made this joke. He said, even God lost $20 on that one. All right. On this date in 1941, Adolf Hitler declared in his speech in Berlin that Russia has been broken and would not rise again. In 1944, during World War II, U.S. Army troops cracked the Siegfried Line north of Aachen, Germany. In 1951, the New York Giants captured the National League pennant by a score of 5-4 as Bobby Thompson hit a 3-run homer off Ralph Branca of the Brooklyn Dodgers in the shot heard round the world. In 1961, the Dick Van Dyke Show, also starring Mary Tyler Moore, made its debut on CBS. Seen probably every episode of that. In 1970, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration was established under the Department of Commerce. 1974, Frank Robinson was named Major League Baseball's first black manager as he was hired by the Cleveland Indians. In 1981, Irish nationalists at the Maze prison near Belfast, Northern Ireland, ended 7 months of hunger strikes that had claimed 10 lives. In 1990, West Germany and East Germany ended 45 years of post-war division, declaring the creation of a reunified country. In 2001, the Senate approved an agreement normalizing trade between the United States and Vietnam. In 2003, a tiger attacked magician Roy Horn of the duo of Siegfried and Roy during a performance in Las Vegas, leaving the superstar illusionist in critical condition on his 59th birthday. In 2008, O.J. Simpson was found guilty of robbing 2 sports memorabilia dealers at gunpoint in Las Vegas courtroom. Really? It was the same? That's hilarious. Simpson was later sentenced to 9 to 33 years in prison. He was granted parole in July 2017 and released from prison in October of that year. In 2011, an Italian appeals court freed Amanda Knox of Seattle after 4 years in prison, tossing murder convictions against Knox and her ex-boyfriend and the stabbing of the British roommate Meredith Kircher. In 2012, Mitt Romney sparred with President Barack Obama on the economy and domestic issues in their first campaign debate. In 2013, a smuggler's ship packed with African migrants sank off the coast of a southern Italian island, killing more than 365 people. All right, so that is it.